Okay, I'll run the intro. And we are live. Sorry about the brief delay. I'm here with Connor Mortel, and we're going to be discussing today his debate that he had at Mises U with Anthony Cesario. Connor, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here. You are by far the best host of another Catholic podcast I've ever experienced.
Amazing. Well, Caleb, when you want to sell the show to me, just hit me up, man. I'll pay you in gold because gold is better than Bitcoin. Alrighty. Connor, let's talk a little bit about your debate. First, I'd like you to tell me how did this debate come to fruition? And what is the debate talking about?
So it came to fruition last year at Mises U. There had been a debate where people really liked the idea of a debate, although it was between gold and Bitcoin, and the debate itself didn't pan out super well. They wanted to keep up doing a debate, but they thought to make it more interesting, they'd do something with the fellows. So it'd be people who had been interacting with the students all week, and they might be a little more excited to see that. So it ended up being Anthony and I, because we've been buddies for years since our first Mises U together in 21. And we've basically argued every cultural issue that's come up in the entire 2 years. He generally comes more from the left. I generally come more from the right. And as a result, we ended up landing on this sort of overarching issue of, is culture important? Or really what the question was is the non-aggression principle alone sufficient to sustain the free society? We decided pre-debate the non-aggression principle we weren't really going to stipulate. We'd take it more or less as Rothbard defines it. It is you don't have the right to initiate aggression. And we assumed everyone as of day one buys into that. And then the benchmarks for failure were if society completely collapsed or if it returned to some form of state within 3 years.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what does it mean for the NAP alone? Because, would that include there doesn't need to be a religion that everybody agrees on, or there doesn't need to be these kind of other things. What does that actually mean?
So that would definitely mean there doesn't need to be a religion everybody agrees on. I actually, one of my regrets from the debate, and for what it's worth, I don't want this to be my, if I had said this, I would have won, because he beat me fair and square. I'm analyzing what we said, but I'm sure he also has things he'd rather have said differently. So he took that win. But one of the things I'd wanted to get in was kind of asking what's presupposed in the NAP for Anthony. I don't really love the NAP anymore myself, but back in my days when I did, I accepted it more or less on a Christian ground, that Christianity was needed to get to the understanding of the NAP. And I know a lot of the guys I'd spoken to here felt the same way. Other people like Hapa, who had spoken virtually at Mises U this year, talk about how there needs to be some generally agreed upon language, and without generally agreed upon language, there can't be a non-aggression principle.
Yeah.
As far as I know, Anthony, who, for those of you listening who don't know, Anthony is the protege of Walter Block. He is far too humble. He would tell you that he's some random student of Walter Block's. Anthony is Walter Block 2.0. He studied under him at Loyola, and he is going to be the next Walter Block. And as far as I know, Anthony does not necessarily have anything presupposed in the NAP. So it really would just mean an agreement to not initiate aggression on each other. However, I don't really think there'd be much more than that by his definition.
Yeah, because I think really what he kind of just said was that, and we'll get into this in the debate, but he basically had said that with the understanding that NAP, like cooperation would outrule like these kinds of controversy. And so people would basically just kind of settle into their own communities, right? And so that would naturally occur, which of course you and I would probably dispute.
Yeah, I take it.
One thing I noticed, and you can actually see me like holding a pen to my lips here, but one thing I noticed in the debate was that you were basically it seemed like you were a little limited, and we had talked about this before, how, you're at Mises U. Mises U is Austrian. Lou Rockwell is watching you, right? You kind of have to, there's a certain standard you have to argue at, where you can't just like outright reject libertarianism or the NAP without pissing some people off, right? So kind of what was your strategy with the position you were taking? Because I think you basically did say this wasn't your real position, right? You were kind of defending a hypothetical.
Yeah, well, and it's not that this wasn't my real position. It's more that it wasn't my full position.
Right. Yeah.
And the position I ended up taking was, for those of you who have read How to Destroy Western Civilization by Peter Kraft, he argues that if you wanted to destroy civilization, it would take one simple thing, and it would be to have less children. I tried to hammer that, and I did it trying to give it an Austrian framework where I talked about the division of labor. I mean, maybe for a line or two, saying that taking away population will lead to a decrease in the division of labor, which an Austrian obviously would be opposed to. I also tried to really hammer quoting more libertarian giants. So I had some quotes from 90s Rothbard, Lou Rockwell, and then I even had Mises and Marx agreeing that if you wanted to destroy capitalism, the move would be to destroy the institution of the family. And I don't want to say that's not my real position, because I do agree with every part of that. Right. However, I would take it a lot further. I think you need religion for society to really thrive. And quite frankly, you need Catholicism to actually have truly successful, thriving civilization. Yeah. And I think it was evident that I was half-hearted in what I was arguing. And a couple of people actually commented that to me afterwards, where a large part of me losing the debate was me half arguing my position. I mean, my summer research at the Institute was on Alex Epstein's book, Fossil Future. And his biggest claim is that you should always argue to 100. And I really argued to 50 and let that be negotiated against me.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, like, I think I don't actually, kind of accept the NAP. Like, I don't think it's true, because it has a definition of aggression that I don't agree with. And it kind of presupposes, like, certain things about self-ownership that I wouldn't agree with. But what is your actual position on, like, the NAP itself, if it's actually true?
I mean, I don't take issue with it for the most part. I think the majority of, I think if you had a civilization that accepted the NAP, but also accepted a majority of religious virtues, I think the civilization would be fine.
Yeah.
As a Catholic, I'm very comfortable with exceptions to it. You think of things like the universal destination of goods. It's acceptable to steal under certain circumstances. Obviously, I'm not jumping at building a society under the exceptions and the fringe cases. So I don't take issue with the NAP necessarily, but I definitely am comfortable not accepting it at the fringe cases.
Sure. And then what would your view on a state be, right? Because, it seems like there are, I mean, probably just inconsistent libertarians who accept the NAP, but still would say, you need a state for X, Y, Z. So is that more where you'd fall? I mean,
where I generally fall myself is that we live in a fallen world, and we're never going to get to the outcome we want. I think from a strictly economics-based worldview, I don't think it'd be impossible for a anarcho-capitalist society to function. I think if you could, however you got the NAP into people's brains, you also got good Christian virtues into their brains, family values into their brains, I do think that civilization can function. The unfortunate reality is we're in a fallen world where we're never, ever going to get there. And I'm not really setting there as an end game. I'm very comfortable with using the state to get from point A to point B if point B is a more virtuous situation. I do think, generally speaking, the state doesn't get us to a more virtuous situation. And I'm, generally speaking, opposed to the state for that reason. But I don't have the same allergy to it that most libertarians do, because I'm not really the libertarian I once was.
Yeah. Well, I certainly agree with you. Like, I read Anatomy of the State, and Rothbard is, like, absolutely correct on, like, liberal forms of government. Like, I don't doubt most of the things he says about that. I just don't agree that, like, liberal forms of government are the only kinds of states, right? So but yes, we won't dwell too long on that. So kind of as our next question, how did you feel about like just the experience overall of the debate?
It was an absolute blast. You can see in the beginning, I'm clearly nervous and I'm a little
Yeah.
shaky. So
Yeah.
I've got some practice to do and I could improve a lot. That being said, I loved doing it. I would absolutely do it again next year if they'd let me. I mean, obviously we'd do a different topic. We can't do the same thing every year, but I'd
Yeah.
do it again if they'd let me. I had an absolute blast.
Yes. And I totally agree. Like it was a great debate. It was good to talk to people
And it
about
was
it.
perfect for that Saturday at Mises
Yeah.
U, where the faculty's really busy running the orals, so they kind of just need something that's still in theme with what we do, but a little less serious. And this was exactly spot on.
Yeah. No, and I think that's great. And it was like it was a nice little kind of break, from all of the crazy stuff that had happened. And so, yeah,
Can't
no,
believe you just stopped sharing to appease David.
yeah, I'm sorry, David. I'm going to keep sharing because I don't know how to get it off of this part. So,
Well, I agree with that. I actually would have told you to stop sharing, but once someone else told us to, I think we should keep sharing the whole time.
especially once David told us to. Okay. Well, so anyways, let's see if I have any more questions or we can launch into the debate. Yeah, so let's do we want to watch Anthony's opening statement or do we want to talk more generally about, what Anthony said?
I'm happy to do either. His trying to remember his opening statement. It's probably pretty easy to talk more generally about it. His if I'm remembering correctly, was just that he kind of did a good job of conceding right wing or conservative or ideally religious virtues can be good. He doesn't say they are good, but can be good. Yeah. And if they are good, then the economic incentives of the non-aggression principle, and to be fair, we also include private property in that, I should say. But the economic incentives in that would inherently lead to more conservative right-wing principles if they really are good anyway. Yeah. Talking more generally about that, that's probably one of the first points that I failed to hit from an outright Christian perspective.
Sure.
And the answer should have been basically what I just said, that we're a fallen world. And I do say that a little bit, but say, look, we're a fallen world. It's untrue that people free to choose what they want are going to choose what's good for civilization. That was one of the first things I didn't hammer hard enough. And he did a good job framing it in a way that an Austrian would really accept, where he didn't describe it as this is good or this is bad, but that the NAP and private property alone would make the cost of bad too high. Is there anything else he really says more in his intro? I'm trying to remember.
I think not that I remember.
He did, to give him credit. I challenged him before the debate to bring out a gold coin and bang it on the podium during his intro. And Anthony did manage to pull out a coin and say the non-aggression principle is one side of the coin and there's another side of the coin, and see, we can really get at this. I got to give him credit while we're recording for pulling that. That was a reference to our last year's debate off.
Actually, let's talk a little bit about the Bitcoin gold debate and what you think went better with with this debate as opposed to the Bitcoin gold debate. I know you already touched on it a little bit, but
I think a lot went better. I think Anthony and I had much more of a pulse on the people here, and as such could be a little more their speed. Last year's Bitcoin gold debate was a good idea, and it could have gone well. The two debaters weren't necessarily excellent, though. The Bitcoin guy, gosh, I can't remember what it was he said, but he really wasn't that Austrian and was making takes that really just weren't Austrian, and some of the takes were just outright wrong.
Yeah.
And then the gold guy was drunk, which, quite frankly, power move, good for him. But as a result,
and you weren't.
Oh no, I know. Unfortunately, I was sober. No, but as a result, like Matt Fradd always talks about that one debate he hosted with Father Gregory Pine and some woman about whether or not it's okay to lie.
Oh yes, I've watched it.
He says that it's the best debate he's ever hosted because every time someone talked, he agreed with the person talking.
Yeah.
The gold Bitcoin debate was kind of the inverse of that, where every time someone talked, you agreed with the other guy.
Yeah.
So I think that was kind of the idea of getting fellows. Anthony spent every night hanging out with the Mises U kids. I was a little more elitist than him, but I made my rounds and talked to them in general. And we just had more of a pulse on what these people wanted to hear.
Yeah.
We didn't. The other thing too was we tried to do like Bitcoin Gold. The one thing that made it good was that it was an economics topic, and Mises U is not a libertarian conference. I mean, it's obviously very libertarian, but if you look at the speeches, it is an economics conference, and we wanted to do an economics topic again, but we kind of decided that ethics is just kind of more fun to listen to in a just generally sexier topic, being ethics or something more political philosophy. People just get more interested in that. So there was also that factor that it was just something people care about more than Bitcoin or gold.
Yeah. And I mean, like that's one thing you notice there. I mean, besides, I think I talked to one guy who identified himself as like a neoclassical, but like almost everyone there is Austrian. It's not, but when I was really shocked with how diverse like the political ideology was at Mises U.
It has, so it's always going to be generally libertarian. Although over the course of the last 2 years, if you look at like the Walter Block libertarian type or a Tho Bishop libertarian type, it's been trending a lot more Tho Bishop libertarian.
Yeah. And, you know, I do wonder how much of that is just because of the libertarian movement changing or just because of the way Mises U, the kinds of people that are attracted to Mises U. I'm not sure, but, you know, I do agree that ethics tends to be more diverse and there tends to just be more room for disagreement there. Like I did not expect that.
And you just think about the Mises said that economics can't be relegated to classrooms. It has to actually be used in policy and used in decision making.
Right.
And at the end of the day, this makes sense for a Saturday thing where you've spent the whole week learning the economics and now you get to say, is Anthony right that this could play out? Is Connor right that it couldn't? And you get to have the economics in the back of your head, but you can still have it. Connor is not a celebrity anywhere, but thank you both.
Yes. And I'm not a better interviewer than
that's
Caleb.
dude,
I just want to point that out.
We had all this prep. If Caleb's listening, we spent like 15 minutes like getting it all set up. Normally Caleb just hits on.
Well, I mean, in fairness, Caleb has been doing this a little bit longer than I have.
He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, I just forgot to hit stream. You think that would do it automatically, but yeah, whatever. Okay. Do we want to go into your opening statement now? And
yeah,
we'll go through it. Yeah. All right.
Non-intervention. Thank you so much.
Okay, there we go.
All right, I'm going to begin differently from Anthony in 2 ways. The first is that I am not going to thank us for an absolutely amazing week. I'd like to thank the faculty and staff and fellows for an absolutely fantastic week.
I just want to point this out really quick. You did not get enough laughs on your jokes. Like I laughed at almost everything you said.
Okay, the joke I'm about to make, I'm actively pissed at this libertarian crowd for not laughing.
Yes,
no, I was literally like the only thing that I was livid that didn't get a laugh.
Well, and I could tell how awkward it was because you expected everyone to kind of.
I was waiting for it. I was like, F all of you. No, the absolutely fantastic joke was not supposed to get a laugh.
Yes, yeah, that
they don't all get the joke. That was just for the fellows.
Yes. All right, let's keep going. And
secondly, I won't be wasting my time complimenting my opponent who is ontologically evil.
That got a laugh.
I've been thinking long and hard for weeks. Honestly, Anthony, I have been going back on this for years about why the NAP is insufficient to sustain a free society. And while I believe there are multiple reasons it may fall short, I don't have enough time to get into all of them. So I want to address the one most important one. And that is simply that with the NAP alone, there is not a person in this room who could figure out how to build the roads. Oh, wow.
I'm livid. I'm never going to forgive that audience for giving me nothing.
Why the NAP is
I just want to watch your face fall again.
And while I believe there are multiple reasons it may fall short, I don't have enough time to get into all of them. So I want to address the one most important one. And that is simply that with the NAP alone, there is not a person in this room who could figure out how to build the roads.
The moment of realization.
That was the
No one
first
laughed
thing I
at.
wrote. I literally wrote nothing else before that. That was the worst. I don't know if I delivered it poorly or what, but that did not land at
No,
all.
you
And I'll
delivered
never
it so
forgive them.
well. And that was the thing, like I'm honestly, I think all you did is you prepared that one joke and then you just freehanded the rest of it, and you just read quotes off. And that was the one thing. And I'm like, everyone is gonna laugh at this. I laughed at it. I thought it was hilarious.
I'm
But
so livid at them.
oh, I just remember I had one more question I want to ask you because they didn't announce it. I kind of was annoyed that they didn't announce it. What do you know what the stats were for how many people Anthony convinced?
Yes,
Let's talk about
Anthony
that really
kicked
quick.
my teeth in. So going into the room, going in the preliminary vote, 45% agreed
Get,
with me.
one second. So I just want to clarify for the audience. It was Oxford style. So Oxford style is everybody votes, agree, disagree, or unsure. If you ever watch like Oxford Union, and then what you do is whoever convinces the most people, changes the most people to their position, wins. It's not just majority vote, because majority vote, I actually want to guess that Connor would have won, but you'd know. So
Majority vote,
with
I
that
did.
said, you did win majority vote. Okay, and then what was the margin?
Well,
for
plurality vote, I won. Neither of us
Yes.
got a
Okay.
majority.
Okay.
But yeah, so the first vote going in before the debate, I was at 45%, and Anthony was at 11%.
Oh wow.
And then the rest was undecided.
Wow. Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
The
Sheesh,
post-debate vote was 44%, so I lost basically one vote. Anthony was at 26%, so he gained, or no, 27%. So he gained 16%
Wow.
from the one vote he took from me and the one undecided, or in the bunch undecided.
That's still a really large majority of undecided people, which is very interesting.
Yeah, I was intrigued by that.
I guess it's not a majority, but that's still a pretty substantial fraction.
I was amazed how many went in agreeing with me. I was not expecting that. I really thought
I'm not surprised by that at all.
I thought
No.
I'd be in enemy territory, and it was really, really not. Like they came in more or less supporting me. Problem was, it left me with no one's votes to shift.
Yeah,
I already had
exactly.
45% of the room.
Well, I remember before the debate started, you're like going around the room telling people to vote undecided, even if they agree with you.
Yeah. You filthy Christians who agreed with me were unwilling to lie in the pre-debate poll.
Hey, Father Gregory Pine convinced me lying was a sin intrinsically, so I couldn't lie and vote.
Well, that woman that argued with him said that if the other person's not owed the information, it's not a sin, and that poll was not owed your position.
Nope, Jonathan Newman needs to know my opinion. All right, so, oh man. And I want to get, so actually right before we go back in, I want to give props to Anthony and Jonathan, who both just did like a fantastic job moderating. Like both of them were just great. And so, yeah, big props to them.
For those of you listening, particularly the one who just commented, Jonathan pointed out that it's a lie to tell waitresses it's your birthday when it's not.
Oh my God.
I'm not going to get into that.
Nobody's going to get this joke.
You either know that or you don't. But
Yeah.
if anyone who just commented about Jonathan hears that, it's worth noting.
Yeah. So, but anyways, yes, big props to Anthony, big props to Jonathan. It was a great debate. So they both did great. And so, and Connor, you only sucked a little bit. So hats off to you, buddy. All right, let's get into your opening statement.
Oh wow, I was counting a laugh.
You did handle it pretty well.
No, but I put in my stupid, silly joke because I want to make it clear that I'm not arguing the statist argument of we need a government. It's a weak argument that is often presented to us when we argue for the NAP, and it's not what I seek to prove today. I'm not trying to argue that we need an exogenous force enforcing the ideals beyond the NAP, but rather that if a free society is to survive, which Anthony and I have agreed in our Rothbard Village discussions, which, as Dr. Newman has claimed, are canon, that our definition, our benchmark for failure is within 3 generations, it does not revert to a state or collapse altogether. And if it is to do so, however it is that we arrived at the NAP, we must also arrive at further key values also implemented in the minds of the people. And I am far from alone in this belief. In fact, I'm standing on the shoulders of not just giants, but libertarian Misesian giants. The great Lew Rockwell said himself that in order to maintain a free society, it is essential that the traditional family be preserved. Furthermore, Murray Rothbard has stated that libertarianism is logically consistent with almost any attitude toward culture, society, religion, or moral principles. In strict logic, libertarian political doctrine can be severed from all other considerations. Logically, one can be, and indeed most libertarians in fact are, hedonist, libertines, immoralist, militant enemies of religion, and indeed Christianity in particular. And these people can still be consistent adherents of libertarian politics. As all too many libertarians turn out to be, strictly logically, one can do all of these things. But psychologically, sociologically, and in practice, it simply does not work that way. Why does it not work that way? There are two reasons that are in line with our two.
Lucas, you moving your lips
failure, and it's that without these two things, society will either collapse.
So sorry, I forgot I was muted. Just tell me when you want to pause it if you want to make a point.
I mean, I don't really have much of a point to make yet. I mean, all I've tried to do so far is just kind of give the audience who's more libertarian permission to agree with me without giving up their stance. Yeah. I'm about to try and get into my reasons why, but so far I'm literally just saying, look, we've got Lew Rockwell in the room with us. We've got Rothbard. We've got, I don't think I've quoted Mises yet. Lew Rockwell and Rothbard, who both can say, agreeing with my position does not make you not a libertarian. You've all heard me be not a libertarian this week, but that's not what I'm telling you to do.
Right. Exactly.
As for regressing to a state, there were very few things that Ludwig von Mises and Karl Marx agreed on. However, this was one of them. Karl Marx stated that the influence of communism will make marriage solely about the partners, not about the children. And that part of the reason for this was that the foundations of capitalism are from the family as the division of labor. He attacked the family because he believed that without it as a fundamental value, capitalism and the free society as such would not last. Mises agreed with this premise, stating that these attacks on the family go hand in hand with plans for the socialization and means of production, and that marriage would disappear with the disappearance of private property. And as you attack the proliferation of children, you further attack private property and the non-aggression principle. The family, and most importantly, as I said, the proliferation of children within the family, must be firmly upheld if we are to avoid the ideology that stands against everything we support. As for the collapse of society as a whole, it's a slightly stronger case to have to make. However, great philosopher Peter Kraft once wrote that if you want to destroy a society, all you have to do is advocate one simple thing: tell that society to have less children. We've learned this week about the values of the division of labor and the way that the proliferation of society can grow into further specialization. It's only logical that actively pursuing a shrinking in that population would also hurt the division of labor. And Peter Kraft pointed this out, saying that it was the greatest tool of civilization was that division of labor. And for a society to flourish, you have to call for the proliferation of children and the protection of the family supporting these children. To destroy a society, all you have to do is flip the script and call for less children. Now, the one thing that Anthony, Murray Rothbard, and myself agree on is that the NAP and libertarianism in general do not in any way forbid things like abortion that would lead to less children, and certainly do not actively encourage the proliferation of children.
So let's talk about that really quick. So among libertarians, there's like a variety of views on abortion. Murray Rothbard is pro-choice. I'm just going to use general categories. I know it's more nuanced, but Murray Rothbard is pro-choice. Walter Block is an evictionist. You and I would be, well, I'm not a libertarian, but you and I would both be pro-life. You could look at who debated Walter Block that was pro-life. Kerry Baldwin. Yeah. And then you have departurists. I can't name a departurist, but you've got a fair diversity of views. Generally speaking, depending on how you define libertarianism, most people are going to be pro-choice. Would you say that's a fair assessment? I don't want to misspeak here.
So I would say I generally believe that the only logical conclusion of libertarianism is being pro-choice. That's a large part of why I stopped calling myself a libertarian. I really struggle with the concept of any way that libertarian philosophy can lead to a pro-life stance.
Sure.
We had a fellow named Manuel who has an interesting theory on co-homesteading that he's starting to win me over on in the last couple of weeks as we've continued to talk about it, that there is a possible libertarian path to pro-life. I can't do it justice, so I'm not really going to try and push it to it. His gist is that because the child created not just occupies the womb, but fundamentally changes the makeup of the womb, they've co-homesteaded that space, and until the child leaves himself, it has an equal claim to the womb that the parent does. He threw it away with some bad examples, but once we got past those, he actually made some interesting points.
Yeah.
Even that though feels tough for me to agree with, and as such, I really do believe the logical conclusion of libertarianism is Walter Block's evictionism. If the mother owns her body, there's no scenario she doesn't have the right to kill the baby. I don't think she has the right to kill her baby, and as such, I think there's more to it than just that. But it's a debate within libertarianism, but I think the Rothbards and the Walter Blocks of the world are more or less right from their foundation, even if their conclusion is wrong.
So we don't need to go into it too much, but talk a little bit about, like, some departurist or some pro-life conceptions like Carrie Baldwin that I discussed, who I think won me over to the position that they aren't incompatible. So
I don't know.
You might not know Carrie Baldwin. I was
gonna say I don't know much. I believe the departurist position, and correct me if I'm wrong, is sort of flipping evictionism on its head. Evictionism is saying that you owe to a child, you owe to anyone, forget a child in the womb. You owe to someone who's trespassing on your property of any kind the least violent means of removal possible, which goes in the concept of like reciprocity and what's okay there. You owe them the least violent means possible. Evictionism would then state it doesn't matter if the child is human or not. It's a trespasser. At week 1, the least violent means of removal is just like there's no way to do that unviolently that doesn't terminate its life. An evictionist would say in week 39, you can have that baby removed without killing it, and thus you owe it that least violent means removed. From what I know of departurism, it's similar, but it adds on the claim that you have some sort of positive obligation to get the child to viability. Like it accepts all the same premises, but it takes, if you have an inviable child, you have to get it all the way to viability.
I think what I'm probably just quoting the Wikipedia article as I remember it, because like I said, I haven't talked to departurists.
I mean, that's fair. You probably know better than I do if you've read the Wikipedia article.
But my understanding is that departurists say that they grant the evictionist premise. They just say you can't separate the act of eviction from the act of killing, because you and I would both understand that the act of eviction, if it kills the child, those two things are not distinct from each other, right? Like if I, for instance, if I were to, like take your brain out of your head, it would kill you. Like you'd be dead.
That's not just theft of my brain.
Right. Yes. It's not, I'm not just evicting your brain, right? Even if you consented to it, right? Or something like that. So I don't think you can conceptually separate the two. And that tends to be the departurist position. As for the pro-life position, I haven't listened to Carrie Baldwin for long enough to represent her view accurately. But I know, man, no, I don't want to misrepresent her view. So we'll just leave it at
my issue with more or less any libertarian argument against abortion is that it's generally coming from motivated reasoning, and it's not a libertarian argument.
Right.
You're coming in with the conclusion that pro-life is the correct position, which it is, but you're getting that conclusion from outside of libertarianism and just trying to bend libertarianism to that will.
Right. That's correct. And, which is silly because most libertarians, including myself in the past, have defended that like the law and morality are two distinct things. So there shouldn't be any conceptual problem for a libertarian on their own kind of metrics to say, hey, it is immoral to always abort a fetus or to evict a fetus, right? But it's legal. And actually, that I think Rothbard even says something along those lines about pro-choice questions. I would have to remember the quote, but I'm not going to get into that. I don't want to misrepresent, but that would basically be how I understand the libertarian position on the matter. So let's keep going. Yeah.
In fact, Murray Rothbard even argued that we should abandon Roe v. Wade because the decentralization and libertarianization of abortion would lead to more abortions.
Okay. This was the weirdest quote I had ever heard.
So this
go into
was, I was proud of working this in because I've actually discussed this with Anthony a lot. And in fact, last summer when I was fellow-ish and not a real fellow, myself and two other fellows went out to Chick-fil-A to celebrate the day Dobbs happened and Roe got overturned. And Anthony actually said to us basically that he didn't have the Rothbard quote, but basically this exact sentence, claiming that at the end of the day, it kind of runs with I've always said that if you have a free market, the subjective wants of the people will be most efficiently fulfilled. If the people's subjective wants are not necessarily good, they will efficiently fulfill bad things. Abortion is a great example of that. And Rothbard actually did say it. And he said it in the 90s when he was at his most right wing, where he actually said that if you decentralize abortion, it will be desirable. And as such, you can't have some nationwide, whatever limits there are. And California can start saying, you know what? Up until year 2 of life, we can abort this child.
Yep.
And as a result, people can start flying to California to get it done on a decentralized level and come home having had it done. So he really did argue that if you decentralized it, because he believes it's a good, he believes the free market will most efficiently provide it. And he thinks that if you decentralize it, you will be able to get more and more abortions. Anthony made the same point to me last summer. I argued with him at the time. And my argument honestly just held at I don't really care. I mean, I do care, but pro-life gets so few wins. I want to see how this plays out. This is the first time we've had a shot at leading to less abortions. I do think Dobbs led to less abortions. I have to imagine it did.
It would be hard to imagine that it didn't. But I think I've seen stats that have said it did.
But I think part of that, and this is where Rothbard and Anthony get it wrong, is that abortion is inherently evil. And I think most of the culture knows this. Yep. And even as the culture is becoming just falling apart today, the reality is that people know on some level, the majority of people don't want to kill their baby. And there are right-wing cultures like Florida and Texas that are at least strong enough for now to say, F all that, this is not okay anymore.
Exactly. Yep, that's right. And I do think, once you start, and this is a very general principle, and I don't want to sound too much kind of like a conservative normie when I say this, but once you start legalizing things, right, you're going to get more of it. And so like with Dobbs and these other things, right, you're just going to, once you kind of have this culture of, abortion is able to be outlawed, right? I got into an argument with a guy who was, I basically asked him if he thought, slavery was wrong, right? Because he had said that abortion was illegal, he said that abortion was legal, so he didn't care if it was moral or not. And I asked him, what was slavery like when it was legal? And it seems like, these kinds of people that care more about the law than like what the actual morality of it is can be influenced by if we change the law or not, right? Making drugs illegal, just to answer David's question, it is going to change drug use. It does change society's general attitudes towards drug use. Prohibition changed society's general attitude towards alcohol. There were some people that already believed it to be bad, but that is a true statement. You legalize something, you get more of it. If that's what society wants.
I think that was one of Ron Paul's lines that worked really well as a line, but I don't think it was 100% true. Of the nobody's not doing drugs just because it's illegal shtick.
Yeah.
There are people who are not doing drugs just because it's illegal. Quite frankly, growing up, I probably was one of those people. Like if I were allowed, now I wasn't going to do drugs, but I didn't drink when I was in high school. And it wasn't because I had a moral objection to it. It was because I was a coward and it was illegal and I didn't want to break the law.
Right. Exactly.
And I'm still a coward. But I do think there are people that wouldn't do. Now, there obviously are. Thornton makes interesting points about stuff like certain drugs becoming stronger or whatnot. I don't know prohibition stuff well enough to get into all of that.
Right.
Like perhaps prohibition leads to stronger drugs and the stronger drugs leads to. But I will say on the very basic first ripple level, there are people who would use drugs if they're illegal and would not if they were not. And abortion is the same way. There are people who would have gotten abortion if it were legal and will not if it's not.
Yeah, and I think that should just be plainly obvious. It shouldn't be a disputed fact. So, all right, let's keep going.
I think that would immediately lead to the family being weakened, the lessening of children, and the worsening of the division of labor. And as such, it would lead to a downfall of our free society. And while Rothbard didn't quite get this, the absolutely fantastic Lew Rockwell said himself, unless we can pass our heritage to our children, we are doomed. So to conclude, I'll quote Rothbard once more, where he was right about this issue, that this is a battle between the corrupt, rotten new culture versus the glorious, life-affirming old. This is our culture war. Thank you all very much.
I have to say, I did a way better job than I thought I did because a certain person in the audience came up to me, actually a couple of people in the audience, a number of them, mentioned to me that I pitched this claiming that virtues lead to more children and lack of virtues lead to less children, which is true. And my response was that I intended to pitch it saying more or less children is in and of itself. I love you, David. I was told that I was saying that I was trying to pitch it saying more or less children in and of itself is the virtue I'm calling for. I'm not saying we need the virtues that lead to more children. I'm saying we need more children and that is itself a virtue. And I got told that I didn't make that clear in my introduction. And having listened to my introduction, I totally disagree with the people who told me that. Yeah. I don't think I pitched it any differently than I claimed I did.
No,
whether that's the right pitch or not is its own thing. I do think I made that pitch, and I was misled in how poorly I pitched that.
Right. Okay. So before we jump into the back and forth, do you have any arguments that you think you would have liked to make? If the circumstances had been different, if it had been a different audience, or just things you would have brought up if you had more time, right?
Yes, absolutely. Hold on. Are you asking for the arguments I would have put into the back and forth that I didn't get to, or arguments?
No. Sorry. In your opening statement, like if you had like an hour to give your opening statement, right, and you could put in everything you wanted, what else would you put in?
So if I could do it having my full wealth of knowledge I have now, knowing I lost, I would have taken a much more Christian angle. If I were rewriting it going into it, I don't think I would have done anything differently. Like without the knowledge knowing I lost, I didn't run out of time. I mean, I was nearing the end of time, but I put in a stupid joke. I put in there was nothing that was missing from my argument that I really wanted to put in. I suppose I probably would have made a more empirical case for civilizations that have collapsed due to people being less successful in their having children. Like if I could find civilizations that did collapse from not having children, like have some sort of data point to point to, that probably would have been helpful. And in our back and forth, I screw that up because you can see that it's not clear to Anthony or to the audience that this would lead to a downfall of civilization.
Right. Yeah. So some empirical evidence definitely would have been helpful. Do you think without factoring in Christianity, like do you think your case that you make in the debate is actually sufficient to take down Anthony's point?
Yes, I think my case is 100% right. I think given a longer debate in the middle here, I can win this. Now, to be fair, and I don't want to pitch this as, oh, I would have won. Anthony's a smarter guy. If we had more time, he would have had more time to answer me. I think the pitch I have here is correct. I think the proliferation of children is vital to civilization. And if you have a culture that incentivizes abortion or decreases family values really in any serious way, you are going to have that culture collapse.
Right. Okay. I take it back. Jonathan won the debate.
So now we'll move into the section of our debate where there'll just be some back and forth. This will be pretty informal. If I sense that there's too much interruption or somebody's not getting enough time, then I'll try to intervene in that sense. So Anthony, why don't you go ahead and start off with some responses to Connor?
Yeah. So Connor, if I'm understanding your argument correctly, what it sounds like you're saying is, in addition to the non-aggression principle, in addition to having kind of a free society with private property rights, one of the core fundamental necessary features that we would also need would be a focus on family values and the proliferation of children.
So this right here,
That'd be
this was one of Anthony's best points, and this is honestly probably where he beat me, is that I had every advantage of the not having the burden of proof. And Anthony did a good job of directing his questions in such a way that it put the burden of proof back on me. Anyway.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I just, he did a really good job of not strawmanning you. Like, it would have been really easy to be like, you think unique Catholicism or whatever, right? So
Anthony and I adjusted our arguments a little bit to win votes where we could, but at the end of the day, he and I really were just having our standard discussion that we'd be having in the parking lot, and this time we had
Yeah.
To be accurate, and I'd add in the fact that I don't necessarily agree with in your introduction. You had said groups will sort themselves out and will work their ways out. I tend more towards Rothbard that the decentralization would lead to less of that as opposed to more of it. So I do agree that's my point, and I think the NAP alone wouldn't lead to that.
Can you just clarify that real quick? It wouldn't lead to what specifically?
Well, so it was the quote I had that he when he called for Roe v. Wade to be overturned so that we could have more abortion, because in our Anthony and I's canon arguments, I think we've come to a conclusion on this, that we agree the decentralization of abortion would lead to more abortion. And I use that as an example because it's a big, strong, hot button topic. But I think generally speaking, family values being the decentralization would lead to things such as abortion that don't strengthen the proliferation of children and the strength of families.
Okay, I'm following that. The one thing that I don't understand would be when it comes to this decentralization, this having fewer children, having maybe a weaker family structure. If you have it within the context of free association, where you have these different communities who are able to kind of branch off and do this own thing and maybe have lower birth rates, how would that fundamentally undermine the system or the structure itself, where you would have these other communities that might be having more kids or different rates of kids?
So I just want to stop here. When I was listening to this, like, I just don't think his argument works. Like, as I was thinking about this, and maybe correct me if you think my objection is wrong, but when I think about, I have not met that many people who are a part of kind of like the anti-Catholicism movement. Most of them I do not know in person, but I have met plenty of people online or on television who don't maybe even propagate anti-Catholicism, but they propagate certain things that just kind of lead to that, right? And so it seems like, in a covenant community, even if you could block out everyone from coming in and spreading your ideas, going on the street and marching or whatever, right? You still have the internet, you still have these other access points. You don't have a guarantee, right? And you bring this up. You don't have a guarantee that you have teachers who are going to teach everything you agree with. My parents sent me to a Protestant Christian school. I didn't agree with everything they said. My parents definitely wouldn't have agreed with everything every teacher said. so even with this kind of free association things, it seems like you still have a sort of risk, right, of these different opinions coming in through different channels. What do you think about that?
I think you're 100% right. And I get into that. And it's at the end of the day, it's all fun and games to talk, oh, we'll all spread into our separate areas.
Right.
And that holds true if I can send my kid to a kindergarten that agrees with me on everything.
Right.
But
But Connor Mortel is the teacher.
Short of me homeschooling my child, that's not true. And there will be, if there were covenant communities and whatnot, each one, let's say there's the Anthony High School and the Connor High School, or Anthony Kindergarten and Connor Kindergarten. And I teach good, right-wing, conservative, Christian, Catholic values to the children. And Anthony gives them all pot. I'm being a little disingenuous.
Yeah. He would.
The reality of the matter is those kids are going to grow up, and by every libertarian argument, these covenant communities are going to trade together in some form or fashion. And when they trade together, it is going to be, oh man, Aquinas even writes something about this in De Regno, but I don't have it here. But when they trade together, their cultures are going to intermingle. There is no scenario where that trade doesn't bring the cultures across to them. And as a result, great book. Even if you had these perfect little covenant communities where it was teaching everything Anthony wanted and everything I wanted, my kids are going to grow up. My kids are going to need whatever, and they're going to trade with them. And realistically speaking, kids from Anthony's school are not going to be able to get a job in Anthony Town and are going to get a job in Connor Town. They're going to meet all the criteria of the covenant. They're going to agree to the covenant community. They're going to sit down, have their school, teach their teachings, and they're going to teach things that were explicitly okay. Nothing's going to be wrong, but little things will be different. Like not to go too Jordan Peterson, but maybe making your bed won't be that important. And that wasn't part of the covenant community. You didn't tell them they had to teach about making their bed, but all of a sudden that's one little disorder that creeps in, and the disordered leftist communities will spread because that is what they do by their very nature.
Right. And so two things with that. So first of all, it's not immediately clear to me even if you have these children who are being taught this, it's not clear that they're going to follow everything or that they're going to teach their children the same thing, right? Again, I was raised Protestant. I'm not a Protestant. I'm a Catholic, right? So that can definitely change. Yes, that can definitely change. But with the covenant community question, it seems like if you want to, propagate these Catholic values without having people creep in, you're going to need a state, right? You're going to need some kind of coercive force within these communities that is saying, hey, you can't say this thing, or you can't practice this thing, right? For instance, one thing that tends to happen, right, is not that you maybe even have people actively speaking on these issues, like talking about this needs to change in society or this needs to change. It's like a action-based thing. If you grow up seeing people do a certain thing, you kind of tend to normalize it, right?
Yes.
Right. When your parents read to you, right, you tend to read more, right? If you see older kids, smoking or drinking, right, that's cool. I want to do that too, right? I'm not saying any of those things are necessarily wrong, but
I used to say this as a kindergarten and first grade teacher, that there was a clear as day correlation between my kids that were overperforming and the degree to which their parents just were home reading with them, like just read a chapter a night. And it's not that reading, if you give a mouse a cookie every night, teaches the kid anything explicitly that makes him better. It's that spending time reading with your parents teaches you to like reading. It teaches you to like having a family and having time with your family. And those things snowball. Yep.
And you don't even have to have explicitly anti-Catholic stuff. Think about, these kind of lukewarm Catholic Christians, right? You have parents who, maybe they don't have an issue skipping mass every once in a while. They don't really make their kids pay attention at mass. They don't pray the rosary with their kids, right? Those things are not anti-Catholic specifically, but they will teach the kid to value it less, right? So all it takes, right, is, oh, mom and dad never really talked to me about having, a lot of children and the value of that, right? And boom, all of a sudden you've got society kind of collapsing, right? Because now you don't have the propagation of children. And to prevent that, right, what do you need to prevent that? Well, you need, some kind of force that's promoting the common good, which of course would devolve into the state.
For what it's worth, I've got Aquinas's thing on basically on covenant communities, but really on trade and how that will lead to their values being there. And it was, moreover, and this is paragraph 138 of De Regno for anyone who's got it. Moreover, this first method of supply is more conducive to the preservation of civic life. A city which must engage in much trade in order to supply its needs also has to put up with the continuous presence of foreigners. But intercourse with foreigners, according to Aristotle's Politics, is particularly harmful to civic customs, for it is inevitable that strangers brought up under other laws and customs will in many cases act as the citizens are not wont to act, and thus, since the citizens are drawn by their examples to act likewise, their own civic life is upset. And that's exactly what I was saying. Like, at the end of the day, if you have to trade with foreigners, even if they're not going to be there teaching other things, kind of like what you're saying, they're going to have different cultures, and that is going to affect your culture.
All right, let's keep going.
So as for how it would undermine the structure, realistically, the downfall of civilization argument in 3 generations is a little too far. I think it's coming more to we deviate back from the nap and refer back to a state. And I think over enough time, I'd be right that society would collapse as we started not proliferating children enough. I think as far as returning back to the nap, it goes back to the Lou Rockwell quote I stated. If we cannot pass our ideas to our children, our society is doomed. Obviously we can, but I'm presuming that the nap is taking our anti-egalitarian stances into condition. And in reality, there are going to be people who are more pro-nap, and there are going to be people who are less pro-nap. And I think in the society where we are allowed to flourish with less pro-family rights, I think such people will be more likely to get their ideas through. They will be perhaps more pro-nap. I don't know what you would call it, but there will still be disagreements within this society. And I think the people with the less pro-family rights will have more success. I think it will lead to lessened birth rates. And in such, there will be, like there is today. I mean, I'm calling out the wonderful Felicia, who has 3 amazing children, and her children are going to lead society one day. However,
they're heroes.
Her children are in the minority, and I imagine that in Auburn, Alabama, we don't have our ideas of the nap being passed on to the children very, very well. I think it'd be very safe to assume that within 3 generations is a tight window, and I'll give that. But I think over time, as family rights started to dissipate, that pushing forward of the ideas that matter, the people with bad ideas sell really well. They sell really well. And if we don't have strong families, there's no way to protect our good ideas, because like Mises said, you protect the ideas of private property through having strong families.
So a question for Anthony. I think I did a really good job at the end there. And the bad ideas sell really well was a great line.
Right.
You protect private property through a family was a great line. But I blew it early where I did exactly what I was saying Epstein warns against. I debated to 50 rather than debated to 100. From the get-go, conceded the 3 generations is tight. I conceded civilization probably won't collapse. I should have skipped right to, hey, at the end of the day, bad ideas sell really well. And if you want to protect private property, you do it through the institution of the family.
Exactly.
That preliminary stuff screwed me.
And to go back to what you said about, like, capitalism does provide what people want. Like, take pornography, right? You're going to have these people who are watching pornography, and that's going to lead to the destruction of the family, right? Inherently. And so, it's a really good point, but you're right. You have to push that to 100, right?
I originally had some of Frad's porn myth book in my introduction as an example of ways that civilization would be detrimented. I
Yeah.
cut it though because I didn't want our boomer donors to have a heart attack on the live stream when they heard me say the word pornography in the middle of a Mises U lecture.
Oh my gosh. No, I kind of wish you had it because that is a great book and Frad makes a lot of good points because
Well, and they're secular points. Like it wouldn't have mattered to this audience.
Yeah. Right. And none of what Frad says is he doesn't attack the well, how do I word this? He doesn't even so much as say that it's like he does say this somewhere where it's inherently wrong, but he points out things that are, even when it is generally accepted, there's still these really bad outcomes that are coming out of it. And so it just seems like it would be impossible for Anthony to argue that things like that and things like abortion and these other issues wouldn't be proliferated within society just because
his argument, because he and I have talked about it before, his argument wouldn't have been that porn wouldn't be proliferated. It would be coming back to the NAP as a central tenet being what makes porn wrong. And I quote Block on this in my conclusion that most of these arguments, in fact, Block says it, all these things that would proliferate would be bad for civilization. But what's wrong with that? They're not against the NAP. That's the problem there is the NAP at its best is a utilitarian claim that civilization will be better if we're not implementing aggression against each other. The problem is it becomes people's central moral value, and that would be what it would be in this situation. It would be their central moral value. And when it's their central moral value, things like porn not only are proliferated, there's no reason they shouldn't be proliferated. I mean, if you're coming from private property and the non-aggression principle, sure, you shouldn't have human trafficked porn, but there's no reason you shouldn't have all the most disgusting porn you can think of.
Right. Well, and I mean, to push back on that a little bit, I do think it's possible to make the case that it would be significantly reduced because, I mean, I would argue almost the majority of porn would be banned under the fact that you wouldn't have sex trafficking because it seems
I do agree that porn would disappear. However, that claim is just that the current porn industry is evil, not that porn is evil.
Pornography itself,
still be. I mean, you look at things like OnlyFans that have taken off that are really just college girls.
Yeah, and that's not trafficking, right?
And so the non-trafficking path is there, and with the non-aggression principle alone, it would flourish.
Well, and the market's good at its job, right? It would adapt. Oh, we can't do this type of, we can't obtain labor, quote unquote, from this source, so we're going to go somewhere else, and that would be OnlyFans or something like that. Okay.
And Ed Fazer tried to make this argument where he said you could ban porn under the non-aggression principle. He calls it the self-ownership principle, but whatever, the same thing.
Right. Yeah.
And he tries to say because it'd be bad for the children of civilization to the point that it would be aggression upon the children. And Block's response is basically your generic, like left-wing having an argument about these things like, well, if you hate transing the kids so much, why are you okay with taking kids to Hooters? And Fazer's like, I'm not. Like, we should also not send these things.
Yeah, it should not be a thing.
Like,
yeah.
Block basically says, well, look at all these things that are right-wing and bad for children, like bullfighting. Should we take kids bullfighting? And Fazer literally just says, no, we shouldn't.
Yeah.
Kids bullfighting.
Yeah, we shouldn't do that. Yeah, it's kind of funny to hear Block. I mean, Block does love to pose hypotheticals, but like whataboutism is not valid argumentation. I think because Jeremy and Grant had been talking about this a little bit with Trent Horn. I don't want to go too off tangent here, but like these sort of hypotheticals, of, oh, well, are you okay with this thing or that thing? Right. No. Right. Anybody can just say stay consistent and principled, and then you don't have an argument anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so, when Ed Fazer says, no, we shouldn't take kids bullfighting, what does Block say now? He doesn't have a valid response. Well, the problem is
Block doesn't respond because Fazer's argument falls apart because in his reply to the reply, he concedes that he no longer buys into libertarianism or the self-ownership principle. And as such, Block doesn't care to reply. The argument ends there.
Exactly. Right.
So we don't see anything.
Then it just
All right, let's keep going.
Okay. Yep.
We're
17 minutes into 45 minutes. So
do you envision might arise with just the non-aggression principle in place that would allow for that value or that norm to carry on. So Connor's saying that the institution of the family will do that. Do you think that maybe we don't need such an institution, or it'll just happen on its own?
So when it comes to a type of mechanism that would keep or sustain these notions of non-aggression or these ideas of non-aggression, I look at it a lot in some ways from an economic perspective, where if you have this system, you have a basis of non-aggression, you have an environment where pushing against that is going to come with a lot of increased costs. You're going to have to be fighting a lot more people. You're going to have to be grouping up. You're going to have increased costs in terms of taking on additional risk and uncertainty. And when it comes to trying to take advantage or pillage or force your ideas on others. So I think there's a strong economic case that would help curtail a lot of these deviations of aggression. If you wanted to try to take advantage of someone, I think there's going to be a lot more costs involved in that. And I think the other part would be through voluntary association and free association. If you wanted to have these other ideas of social values or other types of ideological values, you'd still have that opportunity to do that. And if you have this basis of non-intervention, it seems like you'd have a much stronger bulwark kind of against that.
And we already talked about that, so I don't want to go into it again.
Yeah, we can skip past that. I will say my hang on. Let that play for a second.
Obviously, I'm an Austrian economist. I entirely agree that the free market would lead to the most flourishing of the subjective wants of the people. I don't necessarily think that from that economic standpoint, we get to what's good for civilization, because I don't think the subjective wants of the people are always what's best for civilization. And then if there's an economic incentive to go back to this and it would protect that civilization, then I just struggle with how we got here in the first place if the economic incentive was to remain free.
Well, one of the things that I think about, you mentioned,
and that was a really good question, by the way.
That was my best question. He dodges it, and that I could have won the debate on that question if he didn't dodge it.
Right.
I mean, to be fair, that's his job, is to beat me, is to not answer a question that'll give it away to me. But that was my best question of the debate. I was so proud of that.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a really good question, right? You know, if society is really ordered towards, because you can have, I mean, you still have to pay taxes, but you can have a covenant community in America. It's not impossible. Yeah. You know, there are co-ops of homeschooling. I know people who are part of co-ops. It is not impossible to send your kids to a private school or to homeschool in a big group. Like, and we're still here. Why? You know, if
I had more, if I could do it over again, I probably would have framed it in a more Austrian manner, because his whole take is that the reason we get here, or the reason we wouldn't get back here, is that the costs are too high. And I probably would have done something about entrepreneurship, saying that the cost of starting a business is far too high, and the economic incentive is not to do so. However, at the end of the day, the cost of starting a business gets offset because you've taken on some risk and you're hoping it pays off in the future. And starting a state is very similar. The cost of violating the non-aggression principle may be high. However, if it pays off and you make this entrepreneurial judgment, you have the monopoly on violence, that pays very well. David, that was your entire question, but I asked it better, so it was funnier and better when I said it.
Yeah. And David, I am going to play the video so you can hear your voice. Yeah, but I just think, you know, to go back to what I was saying, you know, we don't live in a free society, but we do live in a society where generally you can express your religious views if you want to. You know, obviously there's social costs to doing so, but that's true in every place you are. So we live in a free society where you can express your religious values. Why are we here? Is it because, you know, maybe humans are ordered towards bad things? We tend to want what is, you know, to use Austrian terms, right? We want present goods over future goods. We care more about short-term kind of pleasure over, you know, a long-term sort of religious, life well lived. So it just seems to me that to claim, that, oh, we'll just get where we're going with covenant communities and stuff, it's just silly. It's just not true. We don't have a historical basis for thinking that.
And a lot about flourishing, a free society.
And we do have a historical basis for it working under a state.
And this is where I blew it. What he says next, I said flourishing instead of sustaining, and that was
and I think that's a little bit different than sustaining. And I think even
yeah, and I remember I was listening to this. I'm like, there we go. He just got creamed a little bit, right?
Yep. He caught it and he nailed it.
Yeah, which is annoying because, right, you could just rephrase it and say sustaining, and it would still work. The objection
and I
would still
do,
work.
but it's too late. Like the heat is out of the moment by the time I rephrase it.
Right. Even you would agree that in a whole bunch of different aspects, people make trade-offs in terms of, okay, maybe I don't want the most economically efficient decision because there's other things that I value maybe a little bit more highly that I'd rather go ahead and pursue that and kind of have that trade-off. So I think in these cases, even if you had a situation where a free society would maybe not be as advanced and flourishing as it could be because the birth rate is around 1 instead of 3, you would still, it would seem, have that society be able to sustain itself and have those people make that trade-off of saying, these are my preferences for how I kind of want to live and exist with other people.
One difficulty with sustaining, it seems kind of hard to say that, with terms like collapse, what exactly that means, right? Because I would argue societal collapse doesn't even have to be like an economic downfall. If everyone is just degenerate, right?
Yeah.
That would be societal collapse.
I had a lot of people say I lost them in the definitions of it all. That a lot of people told me by definition, a free society is one that respects the NAP. Therefore, if they respect the NAP, the free society has sustained.
Right.
And like there were people I argued with after the fact where, in fact, one of the arguments I've had with Anthony led to the conclusion that if a technology came to exist that women could procreate without men, the dying out of the male race would not constitute a downfall of society as long as they continued to respect it.
But it would, like, kind of obvious, right?
Like that, and that's one of the things. And I don't really hammer that at all. At the end, somebody asks me that, and I tell them it's just semantics and basically tell them to sit down. The reason I did that is that the debate was over. Everybody had already voted. And we were basically
okay. I want to say that's one of the most frustrating things they did was having the vote post Q or pre Q&A, because the Q&A is still part of the debate. You may not make every objection you want to, but I made an objection that you didn't make, and it was a good objection, right? It seems kind of weird to have just the debaters thing, and then right. Anyways, so I want to comment on what Garrett just said here. Maybe society should fall, right? It seems like with the NAP, you don't have any way to determine, and I'm kind of just restating the same objection, but you don't have any way to determine, what are our end goals? Is it just the proliferation of the market?
Yeah.
Is it, what is our end goal?
Aquinas has another really good thing on that also in De Regno. I think this is it. To be sure, the light of reason is placed by nature in every man to guide him in his acts towards his end. Wherefore, if man were intended to live alone, as many animals do, he would require no other guide to his end. Each man would be a king unto himself, under God, the highest king, inasmuch as he would direct himself in his acts by the light of reason given from him on high. Yet it is natural for man, more than for any other animal, to be social and political, or to be a social and political animal, to live in a group. I'm not going to be able to find the rest of the quote because he goes on and explains all sorts of stuff the way Aquinas does, defining all sorts of terms. But he goes on saying individually, we should just every man a king, we're good to go. That's all we need.
Yeah.
The problem is we're meant to be social. And if we're going to be social, then we need to have goals as a civilization. And for our goals to have any meaning, we have to be guided by, Aquinas claims, some sort of king. And at the end of the day, that holds just as well here. If all you have is
Right.
the nap, then there is no flourishing, because what does flourishing even mean? You need to
Yeah.
have some desire for civilization to flourish.
Right. And it's one of my critiques of like libertarians. I remember when I made kind of a controversial tweet about God owning everything and, you know, therefore the state is justified. And some guy commented about like the ECP, like the economic calculation problem. And he's like, your government wouldn't be able to properly calculate. And I'm like, okay, but Austrianism isn't, it's value free. Like definitionally, Austrian economics, I agree the state would not be as efficient, right? But you have to justify what kind of value. The NAP is value free technically, at least in terms of it only really comments on aggression. It doesn't comment on anything else.
The NAP is not value free. It's a clear
Right.
value.
No, yeah, you're right. Sorry, I
the
misspoke.
ECP,
Yeah.
that being said, if anybody wants to look it up, Mises.org, Joshua Mahorter calculation is non-binary. And his whole point is that Mises defined a capitalist civilization as one that has a stock market, and that doesn't really hold anymore.
Yeah.
Libertarians get to this point where it's like, if there's any regulation whatsoever, your civilization can't calculate. And that's,
Right,
I mean, if that were true, the West would have already fallen.
Right. Well, there's degrees of calculation, right? We can't calculate as well as we could if we had less regulation. That's probably true.
And that's 100% true. And at the end of the day, a purely Catholic civilization would calculate worse in the sense that, like, I brought up the ultimate or the universal destination of goods. If there were a time somebody stole to feed their family, okay,
Right.
maybe calculation is hindered. Calculation is not hindered to the point that civilization can't flourish.
Exactly.
And
right.
a Catholic civilization or a Catholic state would call for subsidiarity, like Catholic teaching calls for, and that subsidiarity would allow for plenty of an economic calculation. I mean, it's such a weak take to say that if any state exists, therefore you can't calculate.
Which, yeah, and I mean, I don't. Again, going back to this, right? We need to define end goals, and that I think that's something that probably should have been done earlier on. Can Anthony even justify why we need a free society? And that's kind of assumed in the debate, so I don't want to act like he should have made that argument. But
no, for the sake of the debate, you're right. But for the sake of conversation in general, like this point really can't say that, because it's just that the free society leads to the most consenting adults receiving the most of what they want.
Right.
And there's no reason that should be desirable. Anyway,
which is exactly what. Yeah. Let's keep going. And I just want to say, Mises agrees with us on this topic. He says, I don't have like a justification for why you think society should flourish. All I can tell you is this is what you should do if you want it to flourish.
Mises was further right than Rothbard, and people don't get that. But anyway,
Oh, so sorry. There we go.
Okay, so I may have phrased that poorly. You're right that I said flourishing, and it should have been unsustaining. However, I'll take it. I agree there are trade-offs, and I agree people are going to pick the things. I'm not saying economically like they'll pick what's best for their finances. I'm even saying that they will pick X, Y, and Z because it's good for their values, and they think that over this, and as a result, they push for their values. And I'm saying their values can very well be things that are bad for civilization, and that giving. I come from it from obviously a Christian perspective where I believe we're a fallen race, but even from a non-Christian perspective, I think it's easy to look around the room and say we are a deeply flawed group of people. Except for me, I'm very charming and handsome.
I just want to say, I do think you could have laid off the ego a little bit.
I disagree. I think if I'd hammered the ego more, I would have gotten more votes.
You didn't compliment Anthony once, even though he spent like 5 minutes complimenting everyone. And
no, I
actively
actively called him ontologically evil. I stand by it.
Right. You insulted Anthony, and then you just proceeded to kind of keep to compliment yourself, and I was just like watching the debate, like, what is he doing?
Won't apologize for this. That was one of the only times I got a laugh the whole debate. F all that. Stand by it.
Yeah, and you know what? That joke was not nearly as funny as the Rhodes one. So
also, Q, you would understand if you were as charming and handsome as I am. Hit play.
I think if you gave this deeply flawed group of people simply don't aggress against each other and pursue your highest ordered mean, I don't think that their highest ordered means would be things that protect the non-aggression side. I think many people would take on things that would lead to. I mean, like this is an example, and it's not really what I would say would be downfall, but I am a big oil guy. For those who have read my summer research, and as much as I'd love to believe that in a world with,
are you watching football on my very important. I'm just kidding.
Yes, I am.
Okay. You know what?
You just
I
said
know
that
what
they
I
need to go in
say.
tomorrow. People
Yeah,
will
it's
throw
true.
the windmills out the window. I think that the education's already been done as such where, or even not already been done as such. There are people smarter than me who would make arguments against that. And I don't think just because that, let's say for the sake of argument, that my opinion is right. I know I'm some.
Right. Here's another great example of society preference. Nuclear energy. I don't know your full point on nuclear because I didn't listen to your whole green energy thing. I'm coming from the position that nuclear energy is the best form of energy production. It's the safest and it's the most efficient. Almost most of society would not probably agree with me. And it's the fact is, you know, even though that's what's best for society in terms of energy production, it probably would not be preferred because of the work that's been done by, hippies to kind of act like it's connected to nuclear bombs or something like that. Right. I think
Yeah.
Schellenberg talks about this. And so, or take oil. I agree that oil and fossil fuels are absolutely necessary to sustain society. Most people do not understand that, right? They tend to look at the consumer, and here's another thing, right? They tend to look at the consumer because that's what they're at. They're not going to look at these higher orders of production where oil is used, right? And so you will have societies like this falling apart because you just can't know everything. Societies are very influenced by elites with other kind of motives, right? And so even in a free society, that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that feels like a given. And that's why I made this point that here's an example of a time that someone would make the wrong decision, despite the fact that it's fully acceptable in the free society.
Mhm.
That's why we need a state to enforce everyone uses fossil fuels only. Anyway,
Right.
Some dumb moron, but for the sake of argument, my take on energy is right. And that's going to be the best for society. There will still be these people in the non-aggression principle pushing for
Oh, I just stole your point.
other
Sorry.
resources for whatever their highest order. They
yeah,
think it's
while
their
I'm
primary.
saying the
They
same
use it
thing you
for
just
financial
said,
reasons.
I'd
Right.
also
And
like
at
to
the end of the
say
day,
that
they
I
will
just called
pick
myself a dumb
things
moron. So
that
I
will lead
clearly
down
do
more
have some
civilization.
humility.
Right.
Take this.
Yeah, and you insulted your joke too. You should have just gone on a rant about how bad the audience was for not getting your joke.
Honestly, I
It's
wouldn't have
posing
regretted
strong
that.
family values. But I don't think the fact that they have the opportunity to pick things they value more means they will pick things that will not lead against civilization.
Just to kind of build on that a little bit, you mentioned that the society is kind of with these harmful social values or ideas, in particular when it comes to child rearing. And it seems like you're talking about these societies having fewer children and still being able to promote and pursue and push these ideas on others. But one of the things I'm curious about is if you have these other communities where they have a higher children proliferation rate and they have these more socially beneficial values that you would think of family traditions and everything like that, what mechanism or how do you see the communities with higher birth rates and higher children's being subsumed by these communities with fewer children and fewer family values? How do you see them as coming in some type of a position or some type of a way of
This is
threatening
kindergarten
for
teacher.
society?
Skip through my response. We've already covered all this, so it's just going to waste time.
Can you repeat his question? I didn't understand what he was trying to ask.
He's asking if there are different communities, and if there's Connorville and Anthonyville,
Right.
why am I concerned that Anthonyville will be overrun by the values of Anthonyville? And I answer with the kindergarten teacher stuff. We've already covered this.
Right. Yeah.
Your kids all kinds of stuff that you don't want them to know. Other schools who aren't teaching their kids that and who are having fewer kids.
I actually don't totally disagree with you there. But where I'd go a little different is probably lead to questioning and taking away from the non-aggression principle. I don't know why we should expect them to teach these things just because of the freedom of association.
I think there's a little bit of a self-selection process where the people who want the correct or the
he kind of draws analogy here to like an evolutionary process of the best adaptation comes off, but I think that's a very hard case to make just when how slow society moves. We have a pretty bad society right now and it still hasn't collapsed. Like it seems like there's some sort of problem there with kind of trying to say that things will naturally work out, but
or collapsing
it's
or
very
dies in
Yeah.
these particular areas, but the failure of these little communities would be in a context of.
Okay, let's just skip to closing here.
Thank you again, Connor, for
So
this amazing.
before we
this
skip to
amazing-
closing, I will say we don't need to actually play it. I highly recommend for anybody who goes back and watches it. Anthony starts at the end. I say, would you kind of a call for covenant communities? Anthony is vehemently opposed to covenant communities.
Really?
And I got him on air starting to say yes. We ran out of time on the clock, but I will say, had we had more time and I pressed more there, I felt a window coming. The clock ticks when the clock ticks. I blew it, but man, that was one of my moments that if I could Monday morning quarterback anything, I wish I'd pressed that sooner and faster. Anyway,
so I want to ask about that really quick. So Anthony is not in favor of covenant community. Neither of you are really arguing for your full position here. Anthony's really making a kind of Hoppe style argument.
Well, I cornered Anthony a little more into a Hoppe style argument. He and I talked about it afterwards. He didn't intend to go as covenant community as he did,
because that was basically his whole argument.
But yeah, because he's more of a believer that decentralization is not inherently good, and that like, for example, he is an evictionist. Florida banning abortion is not is more decentralized. It's gotten to the state level. We got power there. However, if there were it taken to the national level and the national level said it's legal everywhere, he thinks that'd be the libertarian position because it'd be no law at all rather than decentralized. And I get him really at the end there starting to go that way, but it wasn't quite there. Is that you asking how long this stream is going to be?
No, that is not me.
All right, we'll get to closings and we'll wrap up.
Conversation. I love it. It's great to be able to kind of present.
I
want to make this. I want to make 3 hours. Yeah,
discussions to everyone.
I love Anthony, but
do we need to skip you?
I have nothing left to say.
Yeah,
I want to skip to you quoting Walter Block at the end because that was kind of a mic drop.
Be found in the NAP. So I ask yourself to really take these virtues and vices that you think, and additionally, I'd like you to believe my own arguments. Take these into mind, and I'm not calling for you to give up libertarianism or even to make a libertarian exemption. I'm not saying we need to have a state come and force whatever virtue you believe in or that I believe in. I'm saying that there are virtues that the NAP cannot sustain without. I'm not calling for the NAP minus and saying we shouldn't in society, but we can't stop.
Okay, I missed it, but it's fine. Okay, so we're gonna be done with that. Do we want to? I want to answer this question really quick here, from MHR or from MRH Legacy. By the way, great guy. I met him at Mises U. He's an amazing dude. So, let's answer this question here. So the resolution.
The resolution, when we probably could have explained this more. We didn't have time, so we didn't get into it.
Yeah.
The assumption is that tomorrow the Rothbard button is pressed. Everybody agrees with the NAP.
Right.
But everybody is not inherently going to agree with the NAP forever. Like they can be convinced out of it. However, from the get-go, everyone does.
It's like murder.
Will everyone continue to believe the NAP without some sort of institution defending that belief?
Right. It's like how murders do today, right? Like the majority of people agree, you can't murder someone. I mean, obviously there's exceptions. There's going to be a psychopath who thinks he can violate the NAP, right, and goes around killing people. So, anyways, okay. So we've covered that. All right. Oh, sorry.
We'll use the difference in responses from the pre-debate to the post-debate poll to decide on a winner. And also, we will pass around a microphone for some questions from the audience. So while you're taking the post-debate poll,
then why did we create the state in the first place?
Here we go, David.
It's in my apartment.
I told him to put a question about their mustache. So let me know if they listen.
Hey, great. Hey, I just want to say shout out to Anthony's beard. He really won the debate.
Anthony's beard is legendary. I think that's 7 years.
I have a question mostly for Anthony. We really use like Robinson Crusoe style situations to kind of describe how a free society or like how an economy would naturally grow, right? Well, if that was accurate, then why did we create the state in the first place? If the incentives of non-aggression are that great, then why did we create a state in the first place? And why would this free society not fall victim to those same incentives?
So basically, this is the same question you asked Anthony during the debate.
It is the same question. Anthony doesn't have an answer here. It's too late though. All the votes have already happened. So
yes, again, yeah, this was so annoying. Too little time for one, and then also making people vote before the Q&A. It's just silly.
But the Q&A was just to kill time during the counting, or during the analysis or whatever. I throw Anthony a lifeline here because I know it doesn't matter for the debate.
Just create a state all over again.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Oh, okay. I'd probably have to think about that a little bit more, but
Can I give Anthony a lifeline?
oh, sure. Please.
I'm hoping you've already voted. I do agree with David's point. The one caveat I'd say, just to be fair in this debate, is we did assume these people have been taught the non-aggression principle, whereas previously these people had not been taught the non-aggression principle. I think the incentives that led to the state the first time would lead all over again, but I also, to be fair to Anthony, because I don't actually hate him, I wanted to throw in that.
And I just want to say, I think that's a really silly assumption. The problem is that getting everyone to agree with the NAP is just not going to happen. I'm willing to admit that with any political position, there's just never going to be 100% agreement. You're not going to have it.
Picanonez, I think it was Picanonez, who I've heard say this before, has a
definitely be
great
Picanonez.
line where he says, if your political philosophy starts with "if everyone will just," then stop talking right there, because everyone will not just.
Right. Which is one reason we need the state, right? Because we need to have some sort of force like that. But that's all right.
Yeah, I do think that.
Okay, let's skip it forward.
Whether or not, I think we're absent in a lot of those beginning stages.
This question is primarily for Connor. So when thinking about this question, it seemed like you could almost make an analytical or definitional case that Anthony's position is right. If you define, for example, a free society as one in which, you have resistance against the aggression, then if everyone obeys non-aggression, then you're necessarily free, right? So how would you respond to that?
I don't understand this kid's question. Maybe you...
A lot of people had this question. I was sick of this question by the time the debate happened, and you can see that I was sick of it in my answer.
Yeah.
I didn't even try and give an answer to it because I knew votes had already happened. The claim is that the definition of the free society is a society in which the non-aggression principle is accepted. Therefore, if everyone accepts the non-aggression principle, it is... Let's see, it's what MRH Legacy is saying right now. He says, because of this definition, I couldn't win. Because everyone accepts the non-aggression principle, it is by definition sustaining the free society.
Right, exactly. Okay. I don't have much to say. Let's skip to my question because I think I'm next.
Your question's all we have left here.
Yep. Only good question.
Love Artworth. What a stud.
So my question is for Anthony. Anthony, let's say you have a society, right? And your society is allowing evictions in the first trimester. And Connor and I see this and we take our papal army and we come conquer you because you're actually committing aggression, right? We believe you to be committing aggression. One of your points was that your free society would be avoiding conflict in this regard, but it seems like there's these kind of moral gray areas on serious issues that would lead to more conflict, and maybe even like a state, right, where Connor and I's papal army is enforcing these kinds of ideas, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so to rephrase what my question is basically asking, I'm saying two things. So one thing Anthony said during the opening, and we skipped over this, is that a free society would incentivize cooperation over conflict. And I was disputing that because I basically said within the NAP, there's these moral gray areas, like abortion was a great example, in which you're going to have disputes. Now, I know Connor has said that if I hear one more David Gordon thing, I'm going to die.
We have to hear it every time you talk.
So I don't know if this would be implicit in the assumption that when everyone accepts the NAP, they're also accepting the libertarian conclusion about abortion, right? That everyone becomes an evictionist or something like that. But I think it's a fair assumption to say it would not be a universal principle on how the NAP applies, right? Almost everyone agrees abortion is wrong, but we still have differences on if abortion is murder. I misspoke. Everyone agrees murder is wrong. we still have differences on what is murder, what constitutes murder, right? So I
our
think
answer here is the same shtick where it's the debate's over, so I throw him a lifeline so he doesn't have to answer it on camera. But at the end of the day, you make a very good point that abortion is the non-aggression principle doesn't know what abortion means. Like where is the line? Now it may be a fringe question of where to draw the line, but it's a question. And is it a non-aggression principle for you and I to have our papal army come kill him for that?
Right.
Is it totally acceptable to abort a child up to and including birth? And
right.
the non-aggression
Is
principle
is infanticide acceptable, right? Like that might be that might be a question because you have people like Ben Sievers. Well, can I call him out like that? Well, we'll call him out. He would say this publicly. But there are people like Ben who would say, parents own their children. And under the law, that would be, parents can abuse their children, right? Now, obviously, Ben doesn't want that. I want to clarify that.
Yeah,
right?
I'm also, just to throw this out here, Ben makes a pretty strong point of holding off making this a public thing. So I don't want to bury him under that opinion here.
No. Yeah. So don't go attacking him about this. But I'm just, as an example, right? There are people who think parents own their children. They have ownership over their children. And so it seems to me that if I saw a society which was, abusing children under the principle of, oh, we have the NAP and parents own their children, I would not have an issue with taking that to society. There are a whole number of issues like children's rights and abortion. Major conflict, like some sort of war that could occur under the NAP that just seem to be kind of these moral gray areas. So yeah, that was my main objection. I don't think we need to go over Anthony's answer to this. We've already talked about it.
I don't think so either. Honestly, I don't even know if we should take questions from the chat now that we're an hour and a half into this stream.
Are you? Well, we'll take.
No, I'm open to it. I'll answer some.
Yeah.
I have nowhere to go. I just.
Yeah. I want to make this too long. Let's try to beat a Pints with Aquinas record and go for like 12 hours. David had asked earlier on, is there a difference between ethics and morality? I don't know what he means. So
I'm not smart enough to answer that. It might be something like ethics is the study of morality to some extent. There could be. I use them interchangeably in this episode. So for the sake of this episode, I'll say no, but I'm very open to a person much smarter than me having a better answer.
I might have misspoke. I think what I meant to say, if I did misspeak and I said something like that, I meant to say libertarians conceptually distinguish between moral law and like the law itself. Like
you
legal.
Didn't misspeak. I think this was a follow-up question, like doubling down on that, because you did say law. But I think it's saying, okay, there is a distinction between law and morality. Is there a distinction between ethics and morality?
Yeah. There's different types of kind of moral discussions on, like there's meta ethics, right? Like, so you have deontology, you have utilitarianism, you have virtue ethics. That would not be the same as, moral action technically. But yeah, no, I don't think there's like a massive difference, and those two things are kind of colloquially the same thing. I want to wait. What did he say here? A mother can't get an abortion unless her parents consent to it. Oh, okay. So he's just making a joke about. Yeah, never mind. All right. So I don't think we have any other questions. So I think we can just close it here. Connor, let's see if I have like one last question for you to ask that we can end on.
I will say the one last thing that if we need something to end on is that the one line that I didn't work into my conclusion, that I blew it and I had written down and I forgot to say is Rothbard has a direct quote, and it would have been so great to point at Anthony, where he says, this solution is perfectly fine at the hippie level. However, above the hippie level, it is completely absurd. Yeah. And I wanted to use, I didn't get it exactly right there, but it's something along those lines. I should have ended calling Anthony a hippie with that quote.
Yeah, would have fit with the beard. I'll ask one thing, just for fun. What do you think the best justification of the NAP is?
The best justification of the NAP is probably that on some inherent level, aggression feels wrong. If you asked 100 people, is it ever wrong to aggress against someone? I think you'd have several outcomes where 100 people would say yes, you can't aggress upon someone. Most people who justify aggression think that there was some previous form of aggression, and it gets into definitions of what aggression was. Inherently, we do think aggression is wrong. And I think that's because aggression is generally wrong. And as such, leaning on that inherent belief is a pretty strong argument. Nobody wants to be on the side of pro-aggression. And you shouldn't want to be on that side. In reality, the fringe areas where I take qualms with the enforcement of the non-aggression principle, I find my position somewhat queasy in some of the places because I don't fully understand it, and it's hard to make my case sometimes. So it's probably that inherent distaste of aggression that most people have. Yep.
All right. Well, I think we'll end it there. Connor, I want to thank you so much for coming on the stream. Thank you to can we say his first name, or do we have to?
I think he says his first name.
Thank you so much to Caleb for giving us this platform to host on. And thank you to Anthony for being such a great debate partner.
And to the great mighty Jonathan Newman for being such a great
of course. I
moderator.
have to mention that. Jonathan did a fantastic job. Thank you to Jonathan Newman. And thank you for the Mises Institute for hosting this debate. Thank you to everybody, all the teachers there and stuff. If you are interested in Connor and I's work, down in the description, our Twitters, respectively, you can follow me at Kaholith __. And you can follow Connor at, you can plug yourself.
Natural Authority, except there's no Y because it didn't fit in the space. And then also just go to Mises.org, Connor Mortel. That's where most of my writing's available. So either of those are good places to find our stuff.
And I publish on Substack as well. Under the same name. So you can find me there. All right. Thank you so much, Connor. And thank you so much for everyone who tuned in. We will see you guys later.
All right. Have a good one.